Most men will proclaim each his own goodness, but who can find a faithful man? My name's Arthur, and I thank you for joining me as we meditate together Proverbs chapter 20, verse 6. Most men will proclaim each his own goodness, but who can find a faithful man? It's a characteristic of us that we want to appear good to others, and we will therefore speak up in our own defence. The problem is that who can tell whether we are lying or not? When a person is accused of doing wrong and protests their innocence, well, we expect that they will protest their innocence. When we apply for a job, we are asked to make a case and speak out why we think we are the right person for the job. But then we must also give referees, others who will back up our story. But even this is biased. What we really need is for the person who wants to make the assessment to go out and research what other people will say about you. So it's not just your words or your friends. This principle is expressed in another proverb, Proverbs 27:2. Let another man praise you, and not your own mouth, a stranger, and not your own lips. It is what others say about you that really matters, and ultimately it is what the Lord says about you that really matters. This is probably why, when Jesus was charged in anticipation of his crucifixion, he did not defend himself at all, so that people marvelled. Why? Why don't you make any defence? You hear all these things that people are saying against you, and you make no defence. Well, he had already made his defence in a comment to Ananias. Why do you ask me about what I taught? I taught publicly. If you have evidence against me, bring forth the evidence by witnesses. He knew that whatever he said, it could be taken and twisted out of context. But if you took the whole total body of his teaching, it was consistent and provided a pattern. Were there any faults in that pattern? Evidently not, because they brought no witnesses who spoke against the things that he declared, just false witnesses who could not agree among themselves and were unable to build a case against Jesus. He had no case to answer. His response to Ananias was taken as insubordination. But basically, the testimony that counts for a person is the testimony of others, not the testimony of themselves. This whole issue of people promoting themselves became a big issue in Corinth. Paul established the church there, and others came along and saw here was an opportunity for them to exploit the people. And so they gave their credentials as being Bible teachers, and many in the church started following after these people, resulting in the church being divided, some following Apollos, some following Peter, Jesus, and, of course, some sticking with Paul. Paul had to argue, no, Christ is not divided. We are all following Jesus Christ. The rest of us are just servants. But when it comes to recognising those who are genuinely God's people, he makes a few comments. In 2 Corinthians chapter 10, first these people attacked Paul for not being impressive in appearance or eloquent in speech. For his letters, they say, are weighty and powerful, but his bodily presence is weak, and his speech contemptible. And he responds, let such a person consider this, that what we are in word by letters when we are absent, such shall we be indeed when we are present. They were looking on the outward appearance, but Paul saying, no, that's not the issue. The issue is of the truth of the words, the argument that I lodge. As the Lord said to Samuel, man looks on the outward appearance, but God looks on the heart. We're foolish to follow external appearances and claims. We need to get to the essence of the matters. He continues, for we dare not class ourselves or compare ourselves with those who commend themselves. But they, measuring themselves by themselves and comparing themselves among themselves, are not wise. We, however, will not boast beyond measure, but within the limits of the sphere which God appointed us, a sphere which especially includes you, for we are not overextending ourselves as though our authority did not extend to you. For it was to you that we came with the gospel of Christ, not boasting of things beyond measure, that is, in other men's labours, but having hope that as your faith is increased, we shall be greatly enlarged by you in our sphere, to preach the gospel in the regions beyond you, and not to boast in another man's sphere of accomplishment. He who glories, let him glory in the Lord. For not he who commends himself is approved, but whom the Lord commends. So, yes, we can all boast of our own ability, and modern employment practices actually require you to boast, to set the case, make your case as to why you should be advanced. But ultimately, it is not he who commends himself who is approved, but whom the Lord commends. Our proverb again: most men will proclaim each his own goodness, but who can find a faithful man? What is really required is that a person be true and faithful. God is faithful, and we should be faithful as well. When Paul commended his fellow workers, he commended them as those who were faithful, who could be relied upon, even in discussions with the Corinthians concerning the gift that was to be taken to Jerusalem. They were to search out faithful men who could be trusted. The church had to testify to these men. They were not self-appointed, but they were recognized by the church as faithful men. But history is full of people who have commended themselves. Hitler made great claims of how he could glorify the people. He took them to disgrace. Most politicians spend their time proclaiming their own goodness, but we must look beyond their claims to their character. Therefore, I'm horrified when a leading politician, a president, claims what he does in his personal life with affairs is not relevant to his position as head of state. Of course it is relevant. It relates to his own character. David had a son, Absalom. Absalom had committed murder, but had inveigled his way back into Jerusalem. He then dressed himself up in fancy clothes, got 50 men to run in front of him and say, "Make way, the prince is coming." And then he would meet people and tell them, if I was king, I would sort out your problem. And he stole the hearts of the people, not by doing anything that was worthy, but by simply telling people how good he was. And so he rose up in rebellion against his father, proclaimed himself king. King David had to flee. But in the end, Absalom fell because of his own character and pride. Had he sent Ahithophel out to kill David while David was still on the run, then there was a good chance that he would have taken over the throne. But Hushai advised, "No, you lead the people so that everyone sees it's you." And that appealed to his pride, but it was disastrous to his career. In the midst of the battle, riding his mule under a tree, his head of hair got caught in the tree. The mule went on, and he was left hanging there. He was not a soldier, and Joab executed him. Most men will proclaim each his own goodness, but who can find a faithful man? Let another man praise you, and not your own mouth, a stranger, and not your own lips. The testimony of the goodness and faithfulness of a person is that reputation they gain from others by the things that they do, not just the boasting of their own lips.